Gundam Seed and by extension Destiny are at times fun and perfect schlock, and other times trifling and very tired. I enjoy the cheesy dialogue and the overtop action scenes, on top of the massive explosions and melodrama between the main characters of Kira, Mu, Rei, Rao, and Shin. However, the plot has some interesting elements and ideas, but fall into very tired tropes and do not sufficiently tie them up. Despite all that, I think there are things about Seed and Destiny that are very good, and those good things outweigh the bad. And after completing the entire thing, I find myself enjoying it more than I did disliking it by a pretty wide margin. To be fair, I am someone who is willing to overlook the shortcomings of the story of a shonen if the actions, characters, and ideas are good enough on their own. I think Zing's action is very solid for the series and looks great for the most of the time. Most of the characters are, they're not the best in the world, but they do serve a purpose and they are fine in their roles. And the ideas were interesting for the time period and are done as tastefully as I think you can in an action show. Focusing in on the action, I think like the combat between the mobile suits and the mobile suits themselves look pretty great in Seed Destiny overall. The Freedom is regularly voted as one of the most iconic and beloved Gundam suits of all time, with Japan even building a 60-foot tall version of it. And I think for the most part, even Athrons, Shins, and all the other Gundams look very solid. However, the series does use a lot of shots over and again. Specifically, the shot of the Freedom just blowing stuff up with its 400,000 lasers. That happened a lot at the end of Seed, and Destiny reuses it over and over and over again whenever Atheron and Kira get into any real heavy combat. However, all the original action is pretty great. It's pretty engaging, and as the action got higher and higher, I found myself to enjoy the show even more, especially when they got into space. Gundam does a lot of combat on Earth and other places, but it doesn't really become unlocked in its fullest potential as a property until they get into space. The ability to move in any direction with very little limits is kind of what makes the action so dynamic and fun. It's really transcendent for this sort of action mecha shonen sort of space. And I think what sets Gundam apart from most properties is that free-flowing action in the far reaches of space. And while the show does have spaceships, they don't overtly rely on them usually being a set piece for the non-Gundam wielding characters and other mech suit characters to just kind of sit in and try to assist, but really are just a big set piece to distract from the action. It's really nice that the Gundam can just not have those be the forefront and do things with a lot more interest and flair than having a massive ship battle like Legend of the Galactic Heroes or Star Wars, or name any science fiction to fantasy property you can think of. And, while I do love space, the Earth scenes are still good. Seeing the Freedom, destroy everything in 6 seconds is phenomenal. And I think him doing on Earth or space is still good. But I think what puts Gundam Seed Destiny up higher in the pecking order is just the movement. They seem to be so much freer than a lot of the other Gundams. Especially, I think most of them to this point in the series because of the limits of the animation technology. By the Team Seed came around, I feel like they hit their stride about what they really could do with the mobile suits, how flexible and mobile they could really make them. And when you see Kira and Mu defend the very first colony at the beginning of the show, seeing them just move and just get all this space and cover this much ground is great. And then when you finally get to the climax of both series, it's just such a free and wide-ranging movement in the space and all of it. It's a great evolution from doing what you can in this really confined space and still having this fun and engaging movement to you're in the depths of space and you're still able to do it at an incredibly high level. And I think that's what makes Seed a very good Gundam in terms of the action prospects. When it comes to Seed Destiny, there are a lot of solid and fun characters, and their arcs and development is really nice. And then there's Shin. I'll get to him in a second. Kira's a pretty fine protagonist. He's not the most engaging. He's the super autist. And while he does develop and kind of deal with the trauma of his birth and him being a designer baby, it's fun and it's nice. And I think he's good enough for the show and kind of maybe not the best protagonist possible, but I think he's one the show needed. While he's not nearly my favorite Gundam protagonist, he fills his role. He's pretty easy to root for, and he gets the best girl, so can't complain about that one. And the twists about his origin and his decisions afterward are very solid choices. Shin, on the other hand, is underdeveloped, I'd say. His lack of autonomy and his lack of development overall really drag him down. He's just not someone you want to root for. He's a very terrible secondary protagonists. Like, the clones of Mu, Rao, and Rei are like, each are a facsimile of a person and have their own unique personalities and quirks. And I feel like they do a lot more assisting and moving the story along than Shin does. Shin just kind of gets dragged around. He's kind of like, he's a force. He's not really a character, and I think that kind of, drags him down a bit for me. Speaking of the clones, Mu is kind of like the moral good in that he sides with Kira in the end by both of the series, giving his life up in the first one and doing the exact same thing but surviving in the second one. And I think that's great. I like Mu. I like what he does. I like his role. I like how he fits in the show. I think he does a lot of good things. I think, his skills as a pilot are better than his skills as a commander, but his willingness to do whatever it takes to save people he cares about. It's cliche, and it happens in every show ever. But I like him. I personally like him. Rao is the initial Char clone of the show, and it's obvious from the beginning with, Gundam just can't seem to get away from the face mask. Everyone has to have a face mask. Everyone has to have their eyes covered up. Be like, oh, who is he? But I think Seed does better than some of the other adaptations in making their Char clone, giving him sort of this interesting dilemma and his connection to at least both of the main characters in terms of Kira and Mu, and his twist within the deserted colony is very good. I think it does a very good job. He's the Char archetype, but he's not the most like Char. I think he's probably the least like Char of all the Char archetypes that come out there. Certainly less than Zex. Rei is a clone of a clone, and he's kind of like mini Rao. In pretty much every way, he's Rao with like Benjamin Button syndrome. So like, he's not as good as Rao, but he does serve a role, and I think his deception and pulling of Shin everywhere is good. I think it helps to at least move Shin around when he wasn't going to do that himself. Mu's relationship with Captain Ramius is a nice touch. He's a playboy, but he kind of gets enough to be competent and be enjoyable, and I think his relationship with Ramius by the end is very cute. Rao is like, and even when Mu was being him as Neo Roanoke, his willingness to do whatever was great. And like I said, he's not the best Zex. He's not as good as Zex or Char, but he is the third best of the Char clone. He's the third best overall Char archetype. Atheron as a character is fine for psychic turns friend, turns enemy, turns friend, turns friend, enemy, turns friend to psychic. He's not the strongest character, and I feel like his relationship with Kagli really pull him around, and his sort of like his willingness to betray everything in the beginning of like Destiny don't make a ton of sense to me, but he's fine. He's not great, but he kind of works for the plot and pushes Shin and Kira around, so he works. Loxus, Ramius, and Kagli are nice side characters and the female counterparts of like the main men of like Kira, Mu, and Atheron, and they serve the role. The accidental incest with Kagli is, not my favorite, but it works. Loxus is rebellious face, and the good-natured pop star really give Kira like something to come forward to, and is a great actual like resource for him to use by the end of both series, where she just pulls this immaculate comebacks out of nowhere, which may be a bit of a plot convenience, but who cares? And the captain's, she's steady hand, she drives the crew, she keeps bringing everybody home, always there doing whatever she can to save the day, and I really appreciate that. Kagli's role is like the Monarch of Orb and like the inheritor of the Independent Earth Ordinance is phenomenal. I think she does a very good job at what she's trying to do. It's just she doesn't have like power, and she's not respected because she is a kid, and like not really a woman who was like in a position of power. I mean, she gets married, tried to get marry her off in the second season because she has no power, and is trying to marry off into the nobility to get power and to save the people she likes. So like, yeah, I think that's pretty good. I think they're definitely better on the higher spectrum of Gundam girls. Maybe not the best ever. I think Alaxis is the best major pairing waifu. But like, I think there are better Gundam girls than them. And finally we get to Gilbert. Being the scoundrel big bad was not expected. I mean, you kind of feel like his voice actor, and you're like, it would be obvious for me not to trust you, so I'm going to trust you because I think they're going to pull the switcheroo, and they didn't. They made the bad guy who seemed to be pretty bad, very bad. And like the elaboration in that episode of all the backstories really brings perspective. Oh yeah, Gilbert did all of this. He's been pulling everyone's strings since the beginning. Since some of these people, before some of these people were even in existence, before they were just little clones and the vats of the gene experiments. Like, he's a very sinister villain, and I think he's probably the first Gundam villain that I actually dislike, and I love him for that because it's not a good character. It's his words and intentions. His whole style is like, he's full of garbage. He doesn't actually believe what he's saying, or he's twisting it in a way that makes you want to listen to him. But he just doesn't believe it, or he's just using you. And I found it so irritating, but enjoyable. Like, it's a very successful way. He was like the first villain where I'm like, oh, I actually want to see you lose. I actually don't sympathize with you at all and think you're a really bad person and deserve this. And I think that's great. Because a lot of these Gundam villains don't have me feeling that way. Either I'm apathetic to them, or, like, I don't really care to see him lose, or I get too sympathetic. I'm like, but I kind of like your side more. Like with Char. Like, I kind of wanted Char to win. To tell you the truth, until counterattack where he just kind of flew off the handle. But, like, I kind of wanted him to win. And I think Gilbert is the opposite, where, like, I actually want him to lose. But enough about him. When it comes to, like, the rest of the overall cast, they're somewhere between meh and annoying. Not really a lot of standouts outside of that. Other side characters just kind of fill their role, and you're like, okay, he did his job. He existed. He died for plot convenience or to move the emotional beats along. So, like, I guess that's fine. He doesn't really add much or take away much in his existence not being there anymore, so I'm really going to turn away from it. So, like, the main cast is pretty solid. Shin is a major down point, but all the rest of the main cast does their job, fits their role, and moves the story along. And I think that's better than a lot of Gundams and a lot of other shows. The plot and overall story of Seed Destiny was really about genes and having this C gene inside of you that will kind of explode and make you into this new type, really? Like, it was kind of the way Seed wanted to bring in, like, the cyber new type phenomenon, and more like a sci fiction way, less of a science fantasy sort of way, by having actual science kind of back up the idea of these sort of Seed types. And this was kind of like during the era where Gundam, like, really didn't want to be associated with new types. That really only seemed to be like a universal century kind of idea. They really wanted to focus more on, like, more reality grounded stuff by still taking their liberties rather than these strange mystic powers. And I appreciate the goofiness of new types more than this Jonah Gene thing, but I think Seed Destiny does a decent job at creating their own version of it, even if I don't enjoy it as much as the original. Having Kira, Lu, Rao, and Rei's origin behind the gene experiments and, like, being a designer baby or a clone with these space labs being rated and having characters freak out like, oh my god, I'm a clone, or I'm a designer baby, or I was experimented on, is a great use of these. It kind of breaks a picture of, like, what our future could be like. Maybe we'll get to the point where we do have designer babies. Or, we'll have clones or gene experimentation and be like, how do we cope with this sort of ideas? And I think Destiny shows that some people care about it. And, like, if it's done in a non, like, eugenic sort of way, it works. But as we saw with Homeboy, at the end there, he really wanted to eugenicify everybody. Be like, if you don't have good genes, you're just out of here. You're just getting packed up. Shut out the airlock. Like, so, like, while I do disagree with the ideas of the show, I don't think it's a bad way to bring it out. I think it has, it's really about doing what you can with what you got, really. Like, you could have the C gene, but unless you bring it out yourself, or you're in an environment which allows you to break it out, then you're not going to do it. It's really more of like, you're not what you're made of. It's really who you are. You see that with Lu, Rao, and Rei. They're all clones of the same guy. However, they all got different circumstances, and they all, either wallowed in it or moved past it and became great people. Like, Kira could have just been numb to the world and decided to side with evil to try to get back at being the designer baby, but he would have passed it and decided to save the world in spite of it. However, there are some bad points. Like, Shin being incompetent and not being able to do anything at all. Like, I don't understand if that's just genetics or he's just stupid. I find that annoying. Atheron and Kira do things that don't make a ton of sense or seem to be pretty easily swayed. Like, they do things out of character, or they go back to the character they were the previous season rather than being the person they were at the end. It seemed like a lot of the progression was regressed for no particular reason. And while that's gonna be annoying, and I don't think it's the strongest plot of any Gundam, I think it's still a pretty decent story, and I think I appreciate Gundam trying to incorporate a potential real-world future in this early 2000s sci-fi anime about giant robots punching each other. Coming like to the overall, I think Seed Destiny's pretty solid. It's a good, not great Gundam. It's certainly worth watching and enjoying, and it's really carried by the action and some solid characters. The plot's a mess and things kind of happen sometimes, but not nearly to the degree of some other Gundams. It's animated pretty much like a lot of the shows not Gundam related at the time. So like, the action's pretty good and the direction's pretty good. And that's really what elevates it rather than just the quality of the animation, because, well, sure, it's better than the OG Gundam. It's pretty standard for an early 2000s action show. I think Turn A before it and Double O right after it looks so much better for different reasons. So like, it's not my favorite looking Gundam. And Turn A and Double O are also completely different styles, completely different technology. They're just very different in the way they're presented. And I think I like the way both of those look better than Seed Destiny. Had the show been more competent and tightened up its reasoning and ideas, and made Shin a more likable or productive character, I think it probably could have been one of the 5 best Gundams. But missteps along the way kind of keep it below it. But it's certainly above like X and Victory. So like it's in this weird like upper middle class sort of Gundam where like it's not terrible, but it's also not the greatest thing ever. So like it's really solid and fun and enjoyable, but it's not like breaking the grounds of like really high quality like Zeta or Double O. I think Double O is a better show. I think Zeta is a better show. I think probably Turn A is definitely a better show. I like Iron Blooded Orphans more. I think I like the original more. I think I like Double Zeta more too. Like, it's in that weird like upper middle where like it's not in the bottom half of Gundams, but it's not in the top half. It's a solid show and a good time. Quality wise, it's meh, but like it's fun and the action is good enough where like I enjoy it and have a great time with it. And that's pretty much all I had to say about it.